In today's video, we're going to have a look at the Switchpod. Now, this is not a sponsored video. I bought this with my own money, and being one of the first 800 backers for this on Kickstarter, I got one of the early bird specials and got $30 off the $99 retail price of this thing. Now, today we're going to investigate, is it a vlogging tool or is it a tripod? And maybe it's a little bit of both. Let's get into it. I was quite interested in the Switchpod from the time I saw some of the initial videos on YouTube about this Kickstarter campaign. Just like the concept altogether. Something you can hang on to and use for vlogging, but then set down on a table or any other surface and not have the whole thing tip over. I jumped on the Kickstarter campaign and watched as it hit full funding in about 11 hours from launch. Very impressive. Caleb Wojcik and Pat Flynn, the brainchild behind the Switchpod, lived up to their promises on manufacturing time and shipping, something that other Kickstarter campaigns could live up to. Starting with the packaging, the Switchpod comes in a very attractive box. It's well protected from damage from the foam insert, and I love the fact the lid is held closed with some magnets embedded in the box, in line with the overall design concept of the Switchpod having magnets on the bottom of the legs to keep the legs closed when not fully expanded. The rubber feet on the bottom of the legs keeps the Switchpod from sliding around and are a nice touch and keep the Switchpod from causing any damage to whatever it's being set on. The Switchpod is made from lightweight aluminum and without any other add-ons weighs in at around 312 grams or less than 3/4 of a pound. So it strikes a good balance between size and weight to strength. The anodized finish on the aluminum is very high quality and looks like it'll withstand a fair bit of wear. The ergonomics of the Switchpod are also well thought out. The size is perfect in my opinion, and the grip feels like it's part of your hand. The Switchpod can also be used in a two-handed configuration to give your footage a little bit more stability than just hand-holding the camera. The knob for threading the Switchpod into the camera or other accessory is a good size, and the profile allows the user to get a good tight grip without needing any tools. The 1/4" 20 threaded holes on the legs permit additional accessories to be bolted on, but for me I want to keep the overall rig as light as possible, seeing as I already have the camera rigged up heavy enough anyhow. It positions the camera at a sufficient distance away, so long as you have a wide enough angle lens, of course. The Leica 12-60 on my GH5 Micro Four Thirds camera, equivalent 24mm full frame, is my widest lens in my bag that does not weigh a ton, but I find it a little too tight on the framing and makes me wish the Switchpod came with a ball head in order to be able to reposition the camera angle and hold it out a little further. In my case, I stole the small rig monitor adapter from my camera rig and used it here on the Switchpod just for that purpose. The lack of a ball head as an option is in the neutral category for me. This thing does scream for a ball head, especially when you want to set the Switchpod down on an unlevel surface to level the camera, or permit the camera to be pointed in any direction actually. There were a lot of the Kickstarter backers requesting that a ball head option be added to the offering, which they were more than willing to pay extra for. But I think Caleb and Pat did the right thing by not getting distracted by trying to design and manufacture the extras. It would have only delayed the manufacturing and shipping of the Switchpods. That would have been much more worse than disappointing the folks that wanted the additional feature. Besides, there are a ton of ball heads on the market that can be fitted to the Switchpod. As I said earlier, even a small rig monitor swivel mount can be used. But it's not all roses under the sun for my Switchpod. Now, your mileage may vary when it comes to this, but I've found the manufacturing tolerances to be a bit lacking for the design of the rotating stack assembly. There's either too much clearance between the lugs and the center pin, or too much gap between the lugs that the spacer washers in between don't do a good enough job filling in the void. As a result, the legs of the Switchpod wobble a lot, and the overall assembly when in tripod mode can be a little loosey-goosey, but not entirely unmanageable. The rubber feet do keep the legs from moving around otherwise. But there just needs to be a bit more attention to the manufacturing tolerances design and QA/QC around this part of the assembly. Because the legs are loose, the magnets have a hard time keeping the legs closed as the magnet varies in its position with the leg movement. Now, being an engineer, the first thing I did, however, of course, was to disassemble the Switchpod to fix this issue. Very carefully, I removed the rubber cushion pad on the top of the Switchpod using an Olfa knife to expose the 3 screws which hold the tripod together. The circlips that keeps the axle pin from pulling apart was not fully engaged on my Switchpod, and this probably would have come apart after a short while. Again, just some manufacturing QA/QC checks that need some attention, as this should be a critical hold point in the manufacturing process before the top plate is assembled. When the stack is properly compressed to not allow any slack in the legs, the pin and circlip are just a little too high, or is missing a washer or two in the design. I took some plastic cutting boards that are very smooth and almost the exact same material as the washers used in the design to fabricate a few extra washers to use as shims to adjust for the extra length of the pin and close up the gap to the circlip. After making the adjustments, the legs had very little wobble left. Now, most people would not feel comfortable ripping their Switchpods apart the moment they got them, so I suspect there will be a few folks in the same boat that will want some support for a fix or even a return if this is a problem. So, final thoughts on the Switchpod. Is it worth $99 US? Well, I think the answer is yes. Overall, the Switchpod gets a passing grade in my book. I think it's very sturdy, lightweight. About the wobbly bit there, now I did get a response back from Caleb at Switchpod and saying that that gap in the amount of wobble is normal, it's part of the design. And I can agree to some extent that they want this to be, easy to open. You want that nice action to open and close the Switchpod. But I disagree to some extent. After I went ahead and just put slightly thicker washers in there and used one of the original washers right on the bottom, I found that it removed a lot of the wobble out of the legs, and overall the performance of the Switchpod has, in my opinion, been improved ever so slightly with the little mod that I made to it. It still opens and closes quite easily, and now the legs do function as intended, okay? So could they have done a little bit better job on that and the tolerances? Absolutely. Is it a game changer or deal breaker? No, not really. This thing functions really well, actually. So I'm very happy with it. I'm glad that I did get it on the Kickstarter with the early bird special. Got $30 off of it, so even better in my case. And would I recommend this device? Yeah, if you're a vlogger, absolutely. Go ahead and consider thinking about getting one of these things. Is it better than a Joby GorillaPod? Well, it's different than a Joby GorillaPod, and I don't think the two are meant to compete 100% in all areas. As far as a handheld vlogging stick, absolutely, does a great job. Can I wrap it around a pole and set my camera up? No, I can't, of course, but I can set it down, and with the ball head added to it, again, it does scream to have the ball head added onto it. I think it would just make for a fine pairing. So that's it for my review, guys. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel if you like this content. And as always, be good to each other. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot. Blah, 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 blah.